Good morning and welcome to the Blood Red channel to Liverpool Daily as we discuss the Reds' summer transfer dealings. I'm Guy Clarke. Alongside me, Liverpool.com's James Martin. We want you to get involved, to get your comments and questions in the chat box. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can throughout the course of the show. But James, transfer deadline day has been and gone. The summer window has slammed shut. What's your assumption of what Liverpool have done through the summer?
Yeah, I think on the whole, you've got to remember that a lot of the business was done early. It's almost easy to forget that after the late scramble. It's always the way. I mean, I remember last summer when Canate was wrapped up almost by May, and then by the end of the window, the sort of prevailing narrative was that Liverpool hadn't done anything, and then that turned into a very good signing. So, yeah, it's worth having a bit of perspective after the kind of late scramble, which, to be fair, for once Liverpool have been somewhat involved in, of course, with Melo coming through the door. I don't know necessarily how he affects the rating for the window. It probably improves it slightly, just purely in terms of depth numbers in that midfield. Even if he doesn't go on to make a huge splash, he has potentially eased the crisis there. Van Dijk was talking about the need for just lots of numbers in that midfield with the way they want to play, and he is a tidy player, so I could see it panning out nicely. So I'd maybe give an extra half mark out of 10 for that one, or maybe pushing a full mark. But yeah, Fabio Carvalho, brilliant signing. That one really shouldn't be slipping under the radar. He's been exceptional so far this season. Darwin Nunez, obviously, we've not really been able to see the best of him for unfortunate reasons. But before the ridiculous headbutt and subsequent suspension, he was looking very dangerous.
Has he not saved himself for his manner on the touchline against Newcastle? I know a number of fans have absolutely loved that.
Yeah, he certainly endeared himself a little bit. It was quite funny actually, because the first goal, the equaliser, Thiago was really getting into it, and Darwin was sort of applauding politely. I don't know, maybe he heard the commentators mention it or something and decided to go all out on the winner. But no, yeah, obviously everyone loves that sort of passion, and I'm sure that will be mirrored on the pitch once he's finally freed, in Jurgen Klopp's words.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Yeah, we want your marks out of 10 for Liverpool's summer transfer business. Kumar's got in touch. He said, I would say a 6 only because Calvin Ramsay was injured throughout pre-season and we couldn't sign the desired midfielder this time, which brings us nicely on to Melo, who has arrived. We've got a comment in here from Peru saying, do you think Melo's signing was a hurry just in the deadline's last day? I mean, it is a loan for him. Liverpool don't often go for loan deals. My mind springs back to Ozan Kabak or even Stephen Clarke. They've not always been the most successful of deals for Liverpool, but to me, it does scream of filling a void until perhaps we get to next summer. Although those previous two deals, James, were mid-season signings in the winter window, which were only to the end of the season for 6 months, whereas this one is a full season.
Yeah, Stephen Clarke forever, Jurgen Klopp's first signing. No one can take that away from him. But yeah, it does have a little bit of a feel of that one, particularly I would say the Kabak one, in the sense that it comes against the backdrop of the injury situation. Don King of the Mail reported that it was the Henderson injury that really pushed Liverpool over the edge in terms of thinking they needed to go out and get someone. So yeah, I don't think anyone's under any illusions that this is the player, the right player, the mythical right player that Klopp has been referring to all window. Is just a player that fits. He's a compromise. But as far as compromises go on deadline day, when you've only decided on deadline day that you're really going to push for a midfielder, then I think it's a pretty astute signing. He's got quite a bit going for him, and you don't want to read too much into the fact he's played for Barcelona and Juventus. I mean, there was the whole thing surrounding the circumstances he went to Juventus in terms of that swap with Pjanic. So how much Juventus paid for him is a little bit of a false narrative. It doesn't make him a 70 million euro player or whatever it was, but he is a very good player. These clubs have seen something in him in the past, and yeah, I mean, even in the statement where Juventus announced he was leaving, they referenced his exceptional pass accuracy, which is a trait Liverpool will like to make the most of. That kind of metronomic presence, that kind of calming presence, and he's not as progressive as Thiago, but he has that side of his game to him. He's not going to score or assist that many, but like Thiago, he can pick up the pre-assists. He can be involved in the build-up, and so in terms of a what was a fairly emergency signing. I think he has pretty decent prospects of doing okay.
Yeah, to me, he underlines the impact Thiago's actually had on the Liverpool midfield and changed it from a very functional midfield to a very controlling midfield in the fact that he's been injured, obviously, since the opening day of the window. And yes, it was Henderson whose injury maybe spurred Liverpool to act in the market, but the player they've got is a similar profile to Thiago as what they probably could have found around Europe. And he will come in. It is all about that passing. And I'm sure the idea will likely be he fits into that kind of left-hand side role that Thiago and now Arthur can play for Liverpool this season. Whilst on the right-hand side, that's where you can either have your functionality in the likes of Henderson and Milner, or you can have a bit of flair in either Carvalho or Harvey Elliott, who obviously started the season in really exceptional form. We've got a couple of 4 out of 10s here. Life's an Adventure says you can't rate Ramsay because he's an unknown. Nunez was only signed to replace Mane. Carvalho is a really good signing. Maybe that would push it up from 4, but we needed a winger and 2 midfielders. I mean, the thirst for midfielders does continue. Captain says we could have done better if the likes of Ox had been moved on. Naby Keita, of course, probably in a similar position. The two could leave next summer, and that could really see a mass overhaul in the Liverpool midfield. We'll have to wait and see. But looking forward, Bruce has got in touch. He says, "Good morning. Would you throw Darwin and Melo straight into the deep this weekend and risk them getting injured by Pickford?" Well, it is, of course, the Merseyside derby at Goodison Park. That would be a huge ask, wouldn't it, to throw Arthur straight into the midfield for a Merseyside derby?
Yeah, I mean, I was mulling this question over this morning actually. I'm not sure it could happen. If it were a normal signing in normal circumstances, you'd say absolutely not. Klopp will give him more time to acclimatise, he'll ease him in. That's how he tends to like to do things, particularly when he does business this late and is robbed of the chance to have a full pre-season with his player, or indeed any pre-season. But looking at his options, I mean, I think probably it'll end up being Milner potentially in that left-sided role, but he's already started quite a few games this campaign, and you wouldn't imagine that situation's gonna persist for too much longer. He's in the last year of his deal. He's 36. Yeah, I think probably given that it's the derby, maybe you go for that experienced head. But there's a pretty strong case for throwing Arthur in there just in terms of stylistic profiles. I mean, we've talked about the fact that he's kind of the sort of Thiago light, if you will, and that's where Thiago has been playing. Obviously, he's been out since the Fulham game, but yeah, in terms of the midfield, Klopp ideally is trying to field, then like the obvious fit there is Arthur. I mean, he could go very bold and play Carvalho on the left and Elliott on the right, but the game to experiment with that again probably isn't the Merseyside derby. So once you've got Fabinho and Elliott in those slots, there's not a wealth of options, and you're basically picking between Milner, Carvalho, and Arthur, all of whom have pros and cons. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility. As for Darwin, it's hard. Before Firmino had this little mini renaissance, I'd have said, yeah, Darwin will be straight back in from the off. Now I'm more inclined to say maybe he starts from the bench and comes on after 60 or so.
Yeah, no, most definitely. We'll have to wait and see how it does. Back on the transfer front, Max got in touch. Says next summer we could get Tielemans and Louise on a free. Have to say they're the ones that I'm very surprised over. Arsenal obviously did put in 3 bids in the end for Douglas Louise, but Aston Villa weren't for selling. There was seemingly no movement for Yuri Tielemans on deadline day, given he played for Leicester City against Manchester United. But next summer there probably will be a bit of a rush for them. Are you surprised, sort of looking wider in the Premier League, that no one moved for either of those two?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I didn't realise there was that much activity around Louise until quite late in the day, to be honest. But yeah, certainly with Tielemans, I was very surprised that, as you say, the fact that he was in that starting lineup was like, okay, I guess he's not going anywhere then. But yeah, it seemed as if Leicester were relatively willing sellers. I mean, the chairman had that whole long note in the programme about the situation they're in and about essentially why they needed to sell, or at least if they didn't sell, not to buy anyone. So they had a pretty strong incentive to sell. And the prices that were doing the rounds, you can't necessarily set huge store by them, but the figure of 25 million was cited in one or two places as a point where they would be reluctantly willing to sell. And yeah, for a player of his caliber, particularly when there's a club like Liverpool and to a lesser extent Arsenal on the hunt for a midfielder, someone who's been in the Premier League this long, had such a high reputation for so long. Yeah, I'm surprised there wasn't any more concrete interest.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And even further wider in the Premier League, there was another midfielder come in at a top six club in Dennis Zakaria, who also left Juventus, moved to Chelsea on loan. What do you make of that? Because he's been a player who, for quite a while, gossip columns have linked Liverpool with Dennis Zakaria. A lot of people sort of thought he might have been the prototype ideal replacement for someone like Gini Wijnaldum, but he's moved on to Chelsea. Last summer, of course, Chelsea picked up a midfielder in Sal Niguez who had been linked with Liverpool previously as well, and that one didn't go too well. But I'm sure there will be a few, I suppose, glances towards Stamford Bridge to see how he does adapt to Premier League football.
Yeah, I think we've got a piece from Josh Williams coming out later in the day on that, actually, in terms of just looking at Zakaria, looking at Arthur, and then sort of posing the question of I wonder what it is that made Liverpool go for one and not the other. I suppose it does come back to that profile issue in terms of trying to find someone as close to Thiago as they could at this late stage. Zakaria, not necessarily that player, but certainly, he's a good player. Maybe he fits in with what Chelsea were after a bit more than what Liverpool were after in that midfield. But yeah, certainly if he has a good campaign and Arthur struggles, hopefully that's not the case. But it'll only take a few games of that before people do start to pose that question, probably quite vociferously, and probably in our very own comments box, I imagine.
Yeah, no, most definitely, most definitely. Right, time for your comments and questions here to Daily Show to get your take on things. And there seems to be, well, here we go. Captain again has got in touch. He says, I would like a couple more players in, but I trust in Klopp and the club not to waste money on substandard players like Brendan Rodgers did. I mean, it is one of those. Jurgen Klopp said it, didn't he, in his press conference ahead of the Newcastle game? He would like to have had a bit more risk for Liverpool in this transfer window, but equally, it's one of those, isn't it, where the club are bought into the long term, albeit may well have let it slip through the net. Actually, how pressing the need for a midfielder was. I think once Sadio Mane moved on, maybe James, the focus became all about getting a forward in Darwin Nunez, and then after that, maybe there wasn't much left in the budget.
Potentially, yeah. I'm always a bit iffy on the whole Nunez as a Mane replacement thing because I think Diaz was the Mane replacement realistically. He just happened to come through the door 6 months early because West Ham and Tottenham forced our hand on that one a little bit. So I think potentially Nunez would have come in regardless, although certainly the money from Mane helped fund the move. So it's one of them we'll never know for sure. But obviously losing a player of Mane's caliber did increase the urgency of getting some kind of other elite forward into that front line. Whether that meant that the money was used up, I'm not sure because, I mean, there was interest in Tchouaméni as well, wasn't there? I mean, it's a hunch, but I feel like if that deal had proved plausible, I don't think that would have taken Nunez off the table. So I think FSG would probably have spent the money if they could get the perfect player, but it's always been, depending on who you talk to, either an asset or a fault of theirs, that they are very particular in what they want. I think Klopp has a similar side to him in terms of once a target is identified, he will, be pretty stubborn. There's cases of going to second choices, and sometimes the club will be happy enough with their second choice, and it's worked out very well in the past, Salah being the obvious example. But yeah, it did look very much like once Tchouaméni wasn't available, FSG just decided to sort of call it a day in the midfield market, which yeah, we've already seen was probably a mistake.
Yeah, I suppose with the likes of Barella and Bellingham as well, having been kind of heavily linked, Jurgen Klopp did actually reference that. Maybe wrong to sort of say there wasn't money in the budget for Liverpool, but he sort of said, didn't he, that the players we want simply aren't available. So
Yeah.
Arthur, in the end, maybe has to be the compromise for Liverpool. Kumar says we now need at least two right players in the midfield. A big clear out next summer and a mini overhaul is due now. I mean, it's going to be different to the forward line, isn't it, in terms of how that was replenished over what 2 or 3 windows and 18 months or so it took to get that all done. Whereas the midfield, you do feel actually is going to have to be all done at once. And Kumar's also asked, do you see Tielemans as an option in the next window? Perhaps, maybe not in the next window. He can negotiate with foreign clubs, can't he, on a free transfer in January, but maybe even wait to the summer. Do you think Liverpool might be one of those clubs that put a proposal his way?
Probably not, to be honest. I think if the interest was there, we'd have pushed to do it early once the injuries kicked in. And, he'll be a good deal for whoever picks him up on a free. But, a year from now, he'd maybe getting into that age bracket as well. FSG have still signed players in that age bracket, but right now is sort of the peak time. So a year on, I think they'll be even less inclined to go for him. And yeah, the main thing is the fact that no move of any sort materialised this summer probably suggests to me that there's no interest.
Yeah, Abdullah isn't a fan either. Says Tielemans is bang average. I wouldn't take him. So yeah, it is an interesting one. As the comment here says, managers must not fancy Tielemans. There was a lot of clubs credited with an interest, but in the end, no one did take the plunge. And I mean, ever since scoring the winning goal in the FA Cup final last season, everyone was speaking up the possibility of him moving on, and it didn't look like he was going to sign a new contract then. And effectively, been a full year for clubs to have a good look at him and decide if they did want to take the plunge. But no one seemingly fancying Tielemans to certainly the price that Leicester City were asking anyway. Well, that's all we have time for here on this edition of Liverpool Daily. From myself, Guy Clarke, and James Martin, thanks for joining us. You've been great in the chat box as ever. And until next time, it's bye for now.